I'm Julie Herman of Jaybird Quilts and Lazy Girl Designs, and welcome back to the Gravity Sew Along. Now that we have cut all of our pieces for month 5, it's time to begin piecing our block. If you have not yet seen the cutting video, I suggest you start there. The link can be found in the caption below. In previous months, you've seen me lay out my block over here at the sewing machine. I didn't do that this month because the first step this month is to take all of my F triangles and sew them onto all of my jewels. So it felt kind of silly to lay all that out when I would just be picking up all the same things to go on top of the same things. So I'm going to leave my C on my triangles, and then I'm actually going to take my A and my B and put them down here away from the area that I'm sewing, and that way I won't mix up which pieces are which, so that I know how to arrange things for the next step. So what I want to do is I want to take my triangles and sew them to the 2 corners of my jewels to make large triangles, and I want to make 6 of those. That's going to be the center of my block. And if you look at the directions, I have the triangles in the directions oriented so that the grain is straight across. You can go ahead and do that. It's not as essential with this block as it is sometimes with other things. I personally prefer to take advantage of the blunt corner, and so instead of doing this, which is an option, I often like to start at the blunt corner. So it would put my straight grain here, my bias here. If you don't like that, you do not have to do that. And then with this one, I would keep it that way because this is how it's going to go in the machine. So let me show you what that looks like. I have my machine set to the same settings I've been using, which is my same scant 1/4 inch, so that when I press things open, everything measures exactly where it should be. When I say scant, it's just 1 thread over from what is considered a true 1/4 inch. So I'm doing the first triangle on this side, and I'm not pinning. It's 2 small pieces at this point. I don't find that I need to pin, but if you find pinning helpful, by all means, please go ahead and do that. So I will cut my first one off and my little leader ender scrap. So that's my first triangle. And then I'm going to take my next one and put it over here. And those don't intersect, so I don't need to worry about pressing anything until I'm done sewing all of my triangles. I am just going to continue this process to sew triangles to the 2 corners of my jewels to make 6 large triangles. Now that I have all of those pieced, it is time to move on to the outside of my block. And the outside of my block is also 2 large triangles. One is made with C and D, one is made with C and E. And I will show you what one of them looks like. So where with my other blocks I could do all my sewing without pressing, that's not going to happen this time, because this time I'm going to make a large triangle from 4 triangles. And so I'm going to sew my first 2, and I'm going to need to press. Then my next 2. And so let me show you what that looks like. I'll alternate between my D block and my E block. So I'm going to clip that back to my D just for a moment, just so I don't lose track of which one's which. And so for my first pair, I am going to sew straight of grain to straight of grain, just because they will line up perfectly on top of each other. And again, I'm not pinning, but if you find pinning helpful, please, by all means, go ahead and do that. Okay, so now I'm going to take a C and an E and repeat the same thing. And this is where I could turn my iron on, but I'm at my machine and I want to keep going and I don't have my iron on. So I'm going to open this up and I'm going to finger press and choose my nails a little bit. And then I really like to use my Violet Craft seam roller. Talked a little bit about this in our tools video. It's great for moments like this when I just want to press something without turning my iron on or without getting up from my sewing machine. And I wish I could get up and take breaks, but I'm in the groove right now and I'll get up when I finish this block. So now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and put my next piece on. And in this case, I'm going to take my 2 blunt points, line them up, and then the point of this one will line up with the dog ear that was created from this one. So I don't trim those unless I tell you to, because generally they are often helpful with future alignment. So again, that's lined up right on top of each other there, and that goes right on top of the dog ear. And I'm going to sew right from that point to that valley with my same scant 1/4 inch. And let's do the same thing with my E and C combo. So again, finger press, seam roller, and line up the blunt points and my point with my dog ear. Now let's look at our DC combo, and that's looking great. And I don't really need to worry about pressing this part just yet, but I do need to worry about pressing this so that I can sew my last one on. So I'm going to do the same thing where I finger press this open, get my seam roller, and I'm mainly focused, like I said, on this one. I can hit that with my iron when the time comes. I just need to get this nice and flat so that I can get my last one on. And now I don't want this to be in the way, so I'm going to move this to a corner that is kind of out of the way. And if that bothers you while you're sewing, you don't need to keep it on. You can keep it to the side and reclip it. I just find it really helps me to keep things organized. And then you can decide which way you want this one to be. You could do the blunt down here because it's blunt and the point up here. You could do the straight grain. There is no wrong way here. It's all going to end up working out just fine. I think I'm going to do that on the point and then sew right to that valley. Okay, and I will show you a different, I'll sew it in a different direction on this one, just so you can see options. So move my E-clip to an outside corner. So the last one I sewed with, what did I do? I sewed straight grain, so I sewed point and point. This one I'll start with a point and I'll end with the blunt end. So I'm going to line that blunt end right up on top of the piece as they lie. And then this point is going to go right on top of my other point in my seam allowance, my little dog ear that was created for my last seam. And now I have 8 large triangles to assemble, which we did in month 2 as well. Assembly is a little bit different here, but very similar. The directions are on page 21. And at this point, I need to go ahead and press all my seams open and nice and flat. So turn the iron on for that. So I've gone ahead and already done that with all of my pink ones. So I can continue to show you what we're doing. So now I'm going to take everything and lay it out. How I talked about in the beginning, how I hadn't laid everything out yet. Now that I have all of my triangles sewn on, now I'm going to take a moment to lay everything out. So I'll start with my jewel blocks. And this is where it's helpful that I have my A and B tags, and then the pair that don't have them are the C. I still had that attached to those triangles. So arrange those there. Yep, that's the same as this one. They're all really close, and really at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world if you mix things up, but if you want to follow the directions and have things where they're supposed to be, then the tags really, really do help. Now I have everything laid out and following the directions on page 21. First thing that I want to do is sew these 3 into a half and these 3 into a half of a hexagon. And so when sewing these 2 together, I just want to line this up. And this is one opportunity. There's not many in the quilt, but this is one opportunity where if you wanted to press to the side, you could press one way, one the other way and nest it. There's not a lot of times you can do that. I choose not to because I just like how everything looks when it's pressed open, nice and flat. So I am just going to line these up on top of each other and open it and double check. And you can go ahead and pin if you'd like. I am not going to pin at the moment. We'll see if I regret that choice. And I'm not backstitching here because that's where everything's going to meet up. But up here, depending on which pieces, things might not cross over until we get to the point of sewing our blocks together. So I'm going to do a little bit of backstitching just to make sure that everything stays nice and secure, since we do have a few more months of sewing blocks and I don't want anything to happen between now and then. Slip that out of the way. Let's just sew on my little leader ender and see how that turned out. Okay, looks pretty good. Might have been a tad bit better if I had pinned, or maybe not, who knows, but it is darn near perfect, so I am happy with that. So I will bring it back over here. I always like to bring it back, lay it out, and make sure that I'm taking the next piece from the right place and putting it in the right place. So I'm going to flip this one on here and line this up. And again, I am going to backstitch just a tiny bit. And this is a good place to use a stiletto if you have one. Sometimes things naturally just don't want to stay exactly where they need to be, and you don't want to get your fingers too close to the machine. So a stiletto can be really helpful for holding everything in place. So I'm going to repeat those steps to sew the other half together. I now have both halves sewn, and right now they are exactly the same. And I began to press my seams open, and I am going to go turn my iron on, because at this point we are in the next step going to be sewing this together, and we do have 6 points that are going to be meeting here, and so I want things to be nice and flat before I do my hang pin. I did show you that a couple months ago, but I'll give you a quick refresher on that. And I'm going to do my hang pin, so before I do that, I'm going to head quickly on over to the iron to press these. So now that I have these nice and pressed, I can go ahead and do my hang pin, which is my technique that will help me as best as possible get all 6 of those points to line up. So I'm going to place my 2 pieces on top of each other, how I plan on sewing them. And I've shown this before, but in case you haven't seen it or want a quick refresher, hang pin is called that because 1 pin hangs. So this is the first pin, the hang pin. What we're going to do is we're going to insert from this side right where all the points come together. So that's what it should look like on this side. I accidentally went on a frame with my pink sample there, and now it's already sewn and finished. So I'm going to re-record this real quick with the green to show you. So again, hang pin, we are going to start by going in right there, which is where our point comes together. And then we are going to take this pin and we're going to insert it right here where the point is, where everything comes together. And we are going to sandwich these together, give them a nice little hug. And the important part here is that is the pin that is called the hang pin. And we want to make sure it is perpendicular to the fabric. If it is off to the right or the left or something, then the things are not lined up how we want them to be. So we want that pin to be nice and perpendicular. And then we will take 2 other pins and place them on the right and the left. So right there and right there. And what that will allow me to do is pull out the hang pin, because I can't actually sew with a pin coming through the bottom of my piece. And then the other part of this trick that I find really helpful is not to sew the entire length of the piece, because what if we're off? What I like to do is sew about a 1/2 inch before that point and a 1/2 inch after. And that way, if things are not perfect, I can go ahead and I only have to use my seam ripper to take out a handful of stitches, not a lot of stitches. And I'm going to go nice and slow and make sure that my needle stays right in and goes right down on that point that I am working so hard to get everything lined up. And my pins are far enough away that I did not sew over my pins. You never want to sew over your pins. Go back on my leader ender, and let's see how this looks. That looks pretty good. Not exactly perfect. Maybe this one needs to be up like 1 thread. And I will say I'm sewing with like my light gray, more of like a cream today. I probably would be sewing with pink if I was not demonstrating, because when you can pull, you can kind of see the threads like a little bit. Not too bad, but a little bit. So I'm happy with that. If I wasn't, I would take it out, repeat the steps. But since I'm happy with it, I don't need to take that out, and I don't need additional pins. I can just go ahead and sew the length of the seam, and that thread is basically going to stay there as basting thread, and no need to worry about taking it out. And I also don't need to backstitch at the beginning and end of this seam because I know that when I put on my next set of triangles, I am going to cross over this seam. So I will backstitch at the beginning and end of sewing those on, but I don't need to do that for the step that I'm in right now. Just checking that alignment there. And if you're worried about this alignment here, you could stop, take it off, and sew from this end. Actually, I'm going to show you that because I find I have more luck when sewing from the outside in instead of sewing from the inside out. So if that makes sense, sewing from the outside of the block towards the center. So I stopped right where my thread is from doing my hang pin, and I am going to flip the block over, and I am going to take the time to line this up and finish sewing the seam from this side. It might seem a little weird to be sewing the seam in 3 different steps, but I find that's what helps me to get things as accurate as possible and to not have to take things apart and redo them. And no one's ever going to see the back, especially after it's layered and quilted. So whatever it took for me to get things to be accurate, I'm the only one, well, all of you and me are the only ones that know, and that's okay. There's nothing that says this is wrong. So there we go. That looks great. That looks great. And now I could head back onto my iron, but this is just one little part. So I'm just going to worry about pressing this one little corner for right now. So I'm going to get my seam roller out. And my next piece is going to be my triangle that is made up of my D's and my C's. And that is going to go on here. And there is no wrong way to put this on. It can be rotated whichever way you prefer. So if you have points and you want to take advantage by starting to have something overhang, and then I choose to sew from this side because this side, if we are a little too generous or a little not, it's not really going to make a difference. It's still going to look like a jewel. But if I put this on and I sew from this side and I'm a little off, I might eat that point. And I don't want to do that. So I am going to make sure, since I have a point here, to keep that piece on top. So let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to use my stiletto, get everything lined up. And I'm sewing with the same seam allowance I have been. But what I'm also doing is sometimes we have made mistakes along the way and things have gotten a little too big, a little too small. I'm going to make sure as best as possible my needle goes right in where that point is. And that way it's going to be a perfect triangle in my finished block. So nice and slow, use my stiletto. Let's see how that looks. And there we go. That looks great. So I will now repeat to sew my final triangle down here, and that will complete my block. And then I will go press all of my green ones and repeat the steps to finish my green block. Thanks for watching. If this video was helpful for you, be sure to like it, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. Show us your progress on your gravity blocks in our Facebook group. We'd love to see how you're coming along with your quilt. The link to the Facebook group is below. I'll be back here in the next video to show you how to do your cutting for block 6.